All right, everyone, welcome to our fifth podcast in our Pitfalls of M&A series. Today, we're focusing on creating value and some of the pitfalls we see associated with creating value. So to begin with, value creation as a concept involves a goal to build value, to build personal wealth, to do good, to leave a legacy to your family, what have you. But how do you get there? And we have several steps along the way that we can share our experience. I'd like to introduce Peter Buck, who's our Chief Legal Counsel and President of Tag Ventures. Anything to add there, Peter?
Good morning, everybody. No, I'm excited to talk about this today, Case. I think you're absolutely right that, the mindset is sort of the first step of this is, as an owner or as a founder, how do you create value and how do you measure what you're doing and make sure that the steps you are taking are pointing toward that goal.
Yeah. So Peter and I look at dozens of businesses every year to tuck into our portfolio companies or for an acquisition. And the thing we've always started off with first is just getting the good introductory meeting where we can usually flesh out in an hour's meeting whether or not this owner who potentially would want to be a seller, whether they're our kind of people, meaning we have similar values and that. But ultimately, it's this goal concept of being able to, to really work on creating value. And it's amazing to me how many times folks just really struggle with that concept. And so we've got some ways to look at these things. So every decision should be measured against how much value it creates. It's just like a little ROI type of thought process. Also, the business owner should know their target number or their macro goal for themselves or their family or for their business. And then third, does an investment have a internal rate of return or ROI that creates value, and it's based on your own personal why, and would that interest a buyer? And our philosophy is, owners who are value focused are more likely to achieve their goals. So let's focus on the business owner first.
Yeah, Case, and I would say, one of the things we do in that introductory meeting is really get a good gauge of what the owner or owners or founders are doing in the business. How are they operating? Are they working for the business? Are they working in the business? Or are they working on the business? And those distinctions matter. Working for the business says, I'm an individual contributor and I'm just doing a job and the business is running independent of me. We don't see that very often with founders and business owners. Typically, they're more hands-on than that. But really, where we see a distinction is between whether they're working in the business or on the business. And in the business means they're in it operationally. Maybe they're the COO or they're managing delivery or they're deep into finances. And they are very focused on execution, which is good. You need execution. But what we really like to see is owners that are working on the business. Are they thinking strategically about where this business is going and what decisions are they making, looking out, 6 months, a year, 2 years to grow that business and create value? That to us really is a key value driver is the owner or founder or founders that are working on the business. Now, not to say that they're not working in the business, not to say they don't have people working in the business, but we need that strategic focus to really see value creation.
Yeah. One little tip trick there is that what's the hourly rate an owner works for? So if they're doing way too much for the business, you're going to have a very big delta in terms of what the effort is versus your personal hourly rate. So is it in line with these three in, out, on for the business? The other idea that we look at is, a key ingredient for success is making great hires. I came from a accounting background with Arthur Anderson, and I can tell you that every year we look for a new class, a new start group that was smarter and more capable than anyone that was working at that firm, and really had a very sophisticated interview process that involved, talking to multiple folks, and basically just getting the best folks you can. The other concept that we've seen and talked about quite a bit over the time is, are you a servant leader, a creator of culture? It's super, super important to have integrity, that you're walking the walk and you're developing a great culture. Pete, do you want to add what your thoughts are on the great culture?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to fit, Case. I mean, we look, as you said, at dozens and dozens of businesses every year. And one of the first filters through which we run them is this a good fit? Is this a culture fit? Are these folks that we want to work with? And I think that's important, because no matter how strong or exciting a business is, if you do an acquisition and can't get along with the people running it, you're going to be in bad shape. So I think it's a filter you need to run sooner rather than later is, can I work with these people? And do they have a culture and a set of values that are consistent with mine?
Yeah. So that kind of leads to the next segment. What really drives value, and how do you know you're succeeding? One area is just metrics. There's generally 4 basic value drivers that are also metrics. For example, growth rate, revenue growth rate, and consistency of growth. That is important. We see all the time firms that are maintaining a net income, but without growing the top line. At the end of the day, you're just not going to expand. You're not going to create opportunity for employees. You're just going to be stagnant. It just leads to, stale or lost opportunities. Another metric is your earnings, and in particular, how you acquire new cash flows and streams of, cash and profit. This can be done through, adding on key people, hiring a key seller. It could be done through acquisition or merger, but anything that adds value to that earnings line is going to help create value. And then one that I really like is strategic assets, also, known as moats. If you think about a moat kind of protecting a fortress, the business moats can be intellectual property. It could be a patent. It could be a unique relationship with key folks at a big, customer, or just a stack of all the above. And then the fourth area is, size. The larger the firm, generally the better to grow for economies of scale, less perceived risk, and more business leverage as you go. Pete, do you want to take some drivers specific?
Yeah, I mean, I love those four sort of growth or value areas, but I think the question arises is, okay, great, how do I do that? And what are the accelerators in order to get me there? And I think, we've got a bunch of them. Certainly don't have to have all of them. If you have all of them, that's a home run. But when we think about it, we say, okay, is there a strong leadership team? And do they have a good bench, right? You initially talk to the owner or the founder, but you want to quickly go to, okay, who else is there? Do you have folks that are tenured and capable? And to the extent you've got turnover at the high level, you've got folks to back them up. What is the turnover like? Are people coming in and out? Is it a turnstile, or have people been there a while? You like to see longevity of personnel, particularly at the top. Do you have a diverse customer list? We see lots of businesses, particularly up in the Northwest, in the services area, that are heavily reliant on Microsoft. That's okay, but having massive reliance on one customer can be detrimental to value. So how do you diversify that? Case touched on intellectual property. You know, do you have a protectable IP asset that will box out other folks? You know, that's always a value driver. What's your sales team look like? What's your back office look like? Do you have those key areas dialed in so that you can A, sell, and B, deliver? You know, do you have repeat business, right? Are you able to renew with your customers year after year after year, or is it sort of like a one and done, and then you're moving on to the next one? We love to see folks or companies with, you know, long-term relationships, either contractual or just in practice with their biggest customers. Do you have recurring revenue? Always a plus, right? Are you selling something that can be sold on a subscription basis where you sell it once and every month it just keeps going? How big is your addressable market, right? You could have the greatest idea ever, but if your market is tiny, it doesn't really matter. The flip side of that is you can have a good idea and be one of many, but if the addressable market is massive, there's value there. And don't forget about, do you have cash? Can you, if you need to, go out and spend resources on acceleration of marketing or a new product or, you know, other operational expenses that you need to do on a time-to-time basis? So all of those things really accelerate those four basic drivers above and result in a business that can be very, very valuable.
Yeah, and any one of those line items just mentioned, they all help support a value creation mindset. So we're going to segue now to my favorite part, which is value destroyers, the stuff that really messes you up. And
this is a pitfalls course after all. So let's talk pitfalls, Case.
Right. And we've seen all of these pitfalls show up in many, many businesses we look to acquire. The first being overall, anytime there's risk and uncertainty, whether it's related to your revenue generation, operational organization, you know, lack of IP, lack of scalability, or owner dependence, these are all things that, you know, can really hurt you. In particular, lack of scalability. We had a company that we had invested in a few years ago that was making custom video for Microsoft and Google and other folks. But it was time intensive and it was expensive. And for them to scale that business, they had to just have more people. And it didn't necessarily make sense at the end of the day. And because you know, they had to create more widgets basically, and that wasn't helpful. Concentration of revenue or a dependence on a specific vendor can be good and bad. As Peter mentioned, you know, having a customer concentration at Microsoft can be a really rewarding thing. The problem being simply can go away in a flash if there's a bigger, broader company that can come in and do it cheaper. So long-term relationship that is healthy and predictable is fantastic. But if you get that one customer or supplier that you're dependent on, you've got problems. Another destroyer is just unreliable revenue and financial performance. Usually this is a sign of poor sales and a weak ability to deliver on time and for the right amount, and then just a lack of cash flow that burdens a business and creates a debtor type mentality.
And we've seen a number of instances, Case, where, you know, we've gone into due diligence with a particular target and they can't produce financials or they can't produce them quickly. And that's always a red flag because you're like, well, what's the deal here? What are we missing? What don't we know? And to the extent you can quickly produce financials and have great facility over what they are, you're in a much better spot.
Yeah. Now, we've tried multiple times to acquire businesses that were so murky with respect to their financials that we just couldn't go forward any longer. So, you know, a lot of times you'll see folks that are really talented recruiters or salespeople, but they have no interest or desire to spend time on the financial health and rigor and controls, and it leads to all kinds of problems. It makes it hard to sell the business, no matter who you are. And that was the next point, which is just poor systems and financial controls. It's so common and such a big determinant of business failure. It's just an easy way to break into jail, as we used to say at Microsoft. Poor capital structure is also an issue. Cash flow is king. Access to capital is not always available to all small businesses. A lot of times they can get a very small line of credit, perhaps a credit card. But if you don't have a strong financial backbone and a way to weather, poor times, weak times, it's very, very difficult to succeed.
Another thing I would add there, cases on capital structure, is a bad cap table, right? We've looked at lots and lots of businesses. I can think of one case, a healthcare company, I think it was in Honolulu, that had 40 shareholders on there. Right. And as an acquirer, you look at that and say, I don't even know where to start. I don't know who these people are. I don't know what their interests are. And there's no way, it's very, very difficult to get consensus required, majority required to get a deal done. And of course, your founder in that situation is going to say, oh, it's no problem. Well, I got it. But, you can't keep asking questions about that. And the onion keeps getting peeled. And it's very, very difficult when you've got a funky cap table.
Yeah. Do you want to see advisors and board?
Yeah, I think that's a really good one too. Many of the companies we look at don't have boards, but they have advisors. And sometimes those advisors are more of a hindrance than a help, depending on what kind they are. We've met with a lot of companies that are using essentially brokers to sell their business. And those brokers may not have interests that are aligned with their seller. And that makes it very, very difficult as a buyer to figure out, okay, who am I talking to? Who's got control here, and who gets to make decisions? So that can be a real value destroyer and deal destroyer, more specifically, is it just makes it more difficult to get a transaction complete.
Yeah. Then the last value destroyer is not working on the business. As we mentioned earlier, working on the business implies that you have a mindset of value creation, and you're giving yourself time to ultimately be strategic. One of the concepts we've brought up at multiple times during these several podcasts are the distinction of an owner that's a lifestyle business owner versus one who is looking to have an investment grade asset to sell someday. So that distinction of, sole owner, or maybe, husband and wife owners who have a good long run, they make decent money. Their growth isn't particularly, high, but that's their choice. They only want to work X hours per week and take vacations and not try to, go do a deal every other day. So that's one thing that's absolutely predominant in privately held companies. You can tell really quickly which ones are lifestyle businesses versus, a business that wants to potentially have an exit.
And I would also say that as an acquirer of businesses, when we run into lifestyle businesses, it's really a double-edged sword, because on one hand, they're typically cheaper because they've been run as a lifestyle business. They pulled out a ton of cash for themselves. They haven't grown super fast, but have the possibility of doing so. So as a buyer, you may be able to get a good deal on it. The flip side is, and we've just seen this recently, is the sellers don't want to be there after they close the transaction. And typically, we like to keep them on board, keep them engaged, and keep them working in the business. But sometimes they just say, you know what, I'm out. And so that's a risk in these businesses, as you get the transaction complete, and then the owners that were used to having it a certain way as a lifestyle, and all of a sudden have to work a little harder, say, I'm out. And then you've got a hole at the top, which is can be a problem.
And we have a case study here to discuss. This is a real life situation from about 3 years ago. And the situation was this: we had an owner of an event staffing company. So if you can imagine going to the Super Bowl and their young college kids handing out Red Bulls and other samples and things. So this is a company that had high volume in terms of number of folks on the payroll. But what ended up happening, we got wise to them because the owner had sent out an opportunity for outside investment for her firm, which was not unique. And we ended up answering a call and started to have some dialogue. And the owner was very dynamic, very, sales focused, high energy, just looked like a very dialed individual. As we dug into it, we basically learned that there had been embezzlement, and that came after we'd had 2 or 3 pretty long conversations about infusing capital into that business. But we didn't really know why exactly this person needed the money. So unfortunately, this was an owner who had really gone kind of extreme on the lifestyle business and really left her second and third and fourth in command, alone a lot, while she traveled all over the world and took lots of nice trips and was enjoying her life and her success. Unfortunately, she did not pay any attention to financial operations, controls, any of that stuff that bored her to death, and she just didn't focus on it. And as a result, her CFO ended up embezzling millions of dollars over a period of time. And it took quite a while for anyone to catch it. So it lasted for a good 2+ years. And so it became clearer and clearer that while you have this pretty dynamic business with lots of opportunity, any investment going to this business was really to go pay off the debt, the loss of funds through the embezzlement. And that's not something anyone wants to invest in. And that always gave us pause. We took a different tact at that point because we did believe they had what it takes to grow and do well. And one of the very biggest components of that was getting a good, solid controller and CFO in there and produce a balance sheet, because that was the other problem. Because of so much embezzlement over so much time, it took like 9-10 months for an outside CPA firm to issue a balance sheet. So this was just getting kind of worse and worse as we went through it. And the craziness was, this owner, even knowing and having heard all the problems with her business and the cash flow things, she was always bullish and was always trying to push a high valuation for a business, which made zero sense to us. So we really wanted to focus on good financial management, forecasting, just basic blocking and tackling of finance and accounting, which just had not been happening. So we worked with this group for months and months, hoping to get some opportunity to work with them one way or another. Maybe it was to take on some of their debt in lieu of an acquisition, but ultimately this was it's just not going to happen, because so many of these value destroyers that we've talked about, lack of leadership, and in this case, the leadership was not coachable. That was a huge red flag. Even though this person was very well spoken, very experienced, very impressive individual, it just went in one ear and out the other. So that was a big issue. Again, we've talked about very weak system of financial controls and segregation of duties. That's the lack of segregation of duties allowed the CFO to just, dip into the, honeypot for months and months and months. They had no advisors or board at that time. I think that would have helped to have some coaching there as well. And then I mentioned earlier, this person was not working on the business at all, taking lots of trips, spending a lot of money that they didn't have. And the end of the day, it was a going concern. It was no longer a going concern. And we ended up having to walk away. And in fact, within 2 weeks after that, they missed payroll for 400 plus people and ended up going through bankruptcy. And it really was a shame. And one of the biggest issues we saw there was a robbing Peter to pay Paul type of mentality, where they tried to sell their way out of their debts. And one of the things they were doing was getting some large upfront payments from customers like major beverage companies. And we provided guidance to put that prepaid money in a separate bank account. Do not commingle with daily operational cash. They just ignored that. And what ended up happening is they kept spending up money that was and weren't done with the delivery, and they just got into a hamster wheel that they couldn't keep running on, and they just ran out of money at the end of the day. So Pete, do you have any to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the lack of coachability is massive, because she never stopped spending money and never changed any actions. Didn't try to save money, didn't stop spending, copious amounts on travel and trips and everything else, and just flew the plane into the mountain. I mean, there was no deviation in terms of business operations, despite the fact that they were insolvent for the majority of the time we were talking to them. And thank goodness we dodged that one, because we were really close. And it was amazing to me how close we were to investing. We walk away, and literally, like Casey said, within 2 weeks they declare bankruptcy. So sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, but we got lucky on that one.
And the sad thing is that had her parents had invested a lot of money into that business. She had a former business partner who had loaned a lot of money, and they all were losers as well. I mean, at the end of the day, it was really quite sad. They had to close up shop quickly, let everyone know that they weren't going to get paid their last paycheck. And that wasn't just the office folks. That was, hundreds of, college kids, basically. So it was pretty awful, and it was very, very avoidable, And it really, the distinction of not working on the business, but just kind of for the business as a part-time, sales leader, but not all the time. It just created, a natural disaster.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
on this track, how can you add value? One of those is just kind of know your why. Like, why do I get up every day and do what I'm doing? And how confident am I in furthering my own personal why? Another one is be accountable. As an owner, the buck stops with you. You need to own it completely. And in this case, this case study, they just weren't accountable. They refused to be accountable. Another hallmark of a good company is just compete and win. Like, you're going to hire the best people you can. You're going to put forth the best, proposals, sales opportunities, et cetera, and really count those victories. We mentioned earlier, hire the best talent you can. That is so important. And the companies that I've worked for in the past, the ones that were really good, had that common denominator of hiring the best and the brightest. Another way to add value is, leave your legacy. So, you may have an ownership team that has some unique qualifications and or ideas that they can pass down to others in the organization. Pete, you can give me some examples on that one, like, the kind of legacy that our current ownership team has had over the years.
Yeah, I mean, we've grown a business from a $2 million, technology development firm to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue with a large portfolio. And the legacy they have left is not only financial, but it's also opportunity. I think giving folks the opportunity to do things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do is a massive value driver, because it puts people initially in uncomfortable situations, but it also enables them to grow significantly and do things that they haven't ever done before, and then feel confident doing it. And that enabling folks to do that is a massive legacy for us, in my view.
Yeah. Especially those opportunities coming in early in their career. That's another key piece of that legacy. Support your team every chance you get. So as being an owner, you're also the chief cheerleader. You got to keep your folks engaged and excited and working towards a goal that's known to everyone. And then a key aspect is just be a lifelong learner. So, keep up with current events, read the news, read the latest business books, go to trainings, do your CPE. All those things will help you in the long run for sure. And then just kind of summing up what we've been talking about, to be value focused, you really have to think about every decision you make is measured, on how much value it creates. So every single decision, whether it's to, invest in a new salesperson, we're going to, do our best to make sure that creates value and give them the proper support and time to get there. Another one is, the business owner's got to know their target number or personal, overall macro goal of what they want to do. And an example, in our case, our owners absolutely want to create wealth for all of us and give us the opportunity to do that. So that can happen by building up businesses and getting to a point where occasionally you do an exit and you give those folks the opportunity to put some money in their pocket. That's great. And then the third kind of value focused lesson is, does an investment have the internal rate of return and ROI that creates value based on your personal why and your strategy of why you're doing it? And would that interest a buyer? And Peter, maybe you talk about that, like what interests a buyer when you're looking to go create value and have potentially an exit?
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing, Casey, I think about that is, while we've been going along for the last five months on mergers and acquisitions and the pitfalls thereof, I really think that when you're talking about value creation, you have to put selling your business aside, at least initially, and say, okay, I'm going to grow this business for the long run. I'm going to create value for the long run. And here are the things I'm going to do. A lot of the things that we've talked about today, here are the things I'm going to do in order to do so. By doing that, the buyers will come. Compare that, and Casey and I see this all the time, of owners coming in and trying to operate their business in a way that they think is the best way to sell. And by doing that, sometimes they take shortcuts that they otherwise wouldn't take. And so I think the takeaway here is build your business for the long haul, build your business for the legacy, and the buyers are going to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to kind of round it out, the M&A and pitfall aspect of these podcasts is intended to show both the wins you can get and the outs you can have. And we're seeing some really anomalous results over the past year due to the pandemic in particular, where we've got certain industries that got just completely pummeled, hospitals, movie theaters, you name it. And then other aspects of opportunity. And for example, one of our staffing companies, opportunity came quick and furious when folks, at the major hospitals across the country realized they needed a lot more nurses, a lot more respiratory therapists for COVID. That created a major bubble of opportunity, which we were able to capitalize on. But a year later here, we're starting to have a decline in cases, a decline in demand. And what we're grappling with at this point is, in terms of value creation, is even for our own business and others in that staffing world, they all had great years for the most part. Not everyone, some locums and things like that, doctors just went down because they didn't do elective surgeries for many minutes. But we're in a scenario here where we're having to evaluate value of staffing companies in particular in the healthcare space. And anyone that was in that space generally did very well. So you had a huge spike in performance and revenue and profits. And then now they're at a place where they want to sell. And the conundrum for all of us in this industry is, well, what's normal look like? Normalization, and how do you value a business that went from 50 million to 150 million in 1 year, and then they want to sell and get a high, multiple? That's really tough, and more likely not going to happen unless someone really wants to add something to their big private equity group. Do you have any thoughts around that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that this year and last year have been a little bit of an outlier, and I think a lot of buyers are saying, "Okay, great job, good year. Are you a one-hit wonder, or have you built your company with the right value drivers for the long haul?" Because I don't want to buy a one-hit wonder. I want to buy the company that's built to scale and grow year over year over year. And as buyers, we're asking those same questions. So we've seen it on both sides of the table, and it's tricky because of how different the last 18 months have been. But the value drivers underlying a solid business have not changed.
Yeah, you got to have the strong leadership team, the financial controls, the forecasting, the board meetings, all these things that provide, not only discipline to the business, but really ultimately has the owners feeling a lot more secure and feeling more protected than someone that just doesn't do those things. In the case study I gave you, where the chief owner, the sole owner, was just basically absent, even if she was there, quite frankly, and just when faced with a major hole of cash, played it absolutely exactly wrong. Downplayed it, didn't give the credence necessary there to understand why it happened, and thought they could just buy or sell themselves out of that, out from underneath the cliff. But it's is what it is.
Well, I think we're at the end of our presentation. I want to thank Diana for joining. If she has any questions, we'd love to hear it. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up. We are going to take July and August off because I know lots of folks are out traveling and attendance could be spotty. And we're probably going to be back in September with some additional M&A Pitfalls webinars.
Yep.
Thank you for joining. And if we have no questions, I am going to shut this down.
All right. Thanks, Pete.